Kia ora Aotearoa, good evening and welcome to the Union Report, where we review the news week through the lens of industrial disputes with union leaders, commentators and politicians. Joining me tonight to review the week is the President of the CTU, Helen Kelly, and the National Secretary of the PSA, Richard Wagstaff. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1. How does the public sector view asset sales? Are union members protected? Issue 2. Are league tables an effective measure for public servants? Should we be implementing them in education? And Issue 3. We changed our labour laws for Warners to make The Hobbit, yet TVNZ News reveal that Warners have closed their New Zealand offices. When should we change labour laws for corporations? Plus, we'll wrap the show with a final thought. But let's start tonight with Issue 1. The government is set to pass the most controversial part of their policy platform with the sale of state-owned assets. How does the union movement view this, and what are the ramifications for members? Helen, the CTU is supporting the citizens-initiated referendum on asset sales. Why?
Well, you know, this is an incredibly important issue, and what we know from the New Zealand public is they don't support it, and the citizens-initiated referendum gives them the opportunity to show that in a very, methodical and strategic way. People are just queuing up to sign that petition, never seen anything like it, So really clearly this is the thin edge of the wedge in terms of privatisation, and we see that right across the public sector services being privatised. But these assets, there is no justifiable reason for selling them. It doesn't make economic sense, doesn't make social sense, and so we're providing the opportunity for people to oppose them.
Does John Key have a mandate to sell these assets, or do you think that people voted for National despite their asset policy?
Well, I mean, he'll say that it was a clear issue in the election and therefore he has a mandate, but the citizens-initiated referendum will show that, won't it? And our view is, both from the polling and the way people are queuing up, that that's not going to be the case. And if he was respectful, if he really believed he had a mandate, then he would wait to allow that referendum to take place. The fact they're rushing through the legislation now shows that they know what's happening in that referendum. They'll be watching it, they'll be keeping an eye on it.
What are the ramifications of privatisation for public servants?
Well, public servants are both consumers of these products, and we're going to see prices go up of electricity, so that's a big ramification for them. But also, actually, they currently work as public servants, guarding those assets for the good of the state, for the good of the people, and the role completely changes when they work for a private company. Firstly, their employer changes, and Richard will be able to talk about that. But secondly, no longer are they considered to be, managing them in the interests of the public, but they're considered to be managing them in the interests of the shareholder. And I imagine for many of them, there'll be, less training opportunities, harder to get pay increases. There'll be all these competing demands on them to turn a profit instead of delivering a good service, and that's a real concern. In
terms of social justice, do you think selling off our state assets is a plus or a negative for social justice? Lots of mum and dad investors, that's the argument they'll use, won't it?
Lots of mum and dads having their power cut off. But no, look, the arguments have been well canvassed. There is no justifiable reason for them. They're not going to reduce government debt. They've now admitted that. They're going to reduce government income because there won't be the dividend. They're going to allow the driving up of power prices. They also utilise some of our most beautiful resources, our rivers. And what's going to happen to them when private companies want to use those rivers to maximise profit?
Richard, the PSA in February this year hosted internationally recognised expert on public sector investment David Hall to highlight the deep problems privatisation presented for effective public service. How does privatisation impact your members?
Well, PSA has had a long-standing opposition to privatisation. We had a very strong campaign in the 80s and 90s against it, spent a lot of money on that, and there were a lot of crown jewels sold, if you like, really important assets. And unfortunately, we didn't have the level of public opposition to it as we're seeing now. I guess it was a sign of the times under the sort of neoliberal revolution that was going on. But it's great to see the opposition. For public servants are at the front line of it. Basically, they're not only consumers of services like all New Zealanders, but they're in organisations that end up being privatised. So, the game changes for them at work. As Helen said, they're now working for profit rather than the public. And we know, privatisation comes in many forms. It's insidious. It's been dressed up as PPPs, public-private partnerships, and prisons. Our members in prisons have seen both sides of that. They've seen it come and go, and it's coming back. they will tell you that they get less training, the conditions are fewer, staffing is an issue, the evidence on private prisons is that they are not as secure, they're not as good at prison rehabilitation. You know, basically they just don't score as well, except for on the balance sheet of private companies.
Right.
And you know, that kind of thing is a real danger. But we're seeing the spectre of PPPs come through the education service, through the health service. The Better Public Services Advisory Group report talked about best servicing all of the public service. In other words, seeing if they can do it cheaper by hiving it off to outside contractors. And you know, it's a real problem for our members in terms of the amount of staff there are, the amount of training they get, their conditions of employment, and what their priorities are. And so for us, privatisation is a very significant threat, and it is something that we need the public to understand won't be good for the public in the long term.
Does it change the culture for your members?
Well, it does, because you know, who's now the customer? Who is it that the public service is serving? It's the shareholder who wants higher profits. In the prison example, how do you get higher profits? You reduce costs and you increase your income. How do you reduce costs when staffing is one of your major costs?
Yeah.
You have fewer of them, you have them on cheaper conditions of employment, and you don't basically give them as much training.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we've seen. Prison officers, for example, in the state they get 8 weeks training, private sector Serco they get 3. You know, it's a simple equation really, and you know, that goes right through the services.
Is there also a fear in terms of jobs? I mean, will we see more layoffs?
Oh, absolutely. These private companies don't want to take on as many people. They don't want any strings attached. The state ends up paying them all redundancy. It's a waste of money. Then they'll pick and choose the ones they want, and those people are likely to be on inferior conditions and on less secure employment. So, you know, all of those things are good reasons for us. It's not as good a place to work in, it's not a good place to get services from, and the money goes offshore instead of back into the government for us all to share.
Helen, isn't the truth, as Bill Rosenberg, the CTU's economist, points out, that the New Zealand government's sovereign debt position, though deteriorating, is still relatively stable and not in crisis, meaning that this is an ideological decision, not an economic one?
Yeah, of course it is. Well, firstly, the selling of these assets won't deal with any of the debt issue. So even if there is a crisis, this isn't the way to address it. You know, to invest in the economy and to stimulate it and to get it moving again is the way to address it. But yes, New Zealand has a relatively low level of government debt, and that's indisputable. And so they're using it, they're manufacturing this excuse to sell these assets because they know that you know, people who back them are the ones that are going to be able to buy them.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we've just been involved in these massive disputes. You know, 1,300 meat workers, none of them are going to buy shares in the electricity company, you know, and yet they're going to be expected to pay higher prices. I mean, New Zealand, you know, we had to buy back the railways, we had to buy back the airline, we had to set up our own bank. Those were all as a result of disastrous privatisations. You know, the lack of infrastructure in telephones and telecommunications. Government's now having to roll out this massive broadband initiative, which theoretically a private company would have done themselves if privatisation worked. We don't have a shipping industry because we privatised all of that. Really. These are the jewels in the crown, the few things that we've got left, and there's a terrible future for our young people once these things are sold.
Is there a sick irony that the only people who are going to be able to afford these shares are the very same New Zealanders who have received almost $3 billion in borrowed tax cuts? I mean, as you suggested, it's not going to be all meat worker members who are going to be able to afford these shares, are they?
And now the government's saying that those people that do buy them will get bonuses for buying them. So that's a direct transfer to them. If you've got the money to buy them, say you spend $10,000, which is a small amount, on shares, the government's saying we might give you a bonus 1 in 5 or something at the end of that. So not only will they not get the maximum price for these assets, they will enrich people who do have the money to buy them by giving them bonus shares. You know, I mean, really, it's another transfer directly to those people.
They're trying to sprinkle a lot of money on the equation so they get political support, which is money to their own supporters.
Sure.
I mean, actually, we're all investors at the moment. We all own these assets as taxpayers. Soon there'll be a few of us. So, in fact, mum and dad investors is going to reduce dramatically. At the moment, all mum and dads are investors in it as citizens of this country.
Yeah. Richard, when public servants have to implement free market tactics, like those seen with ACC staff gaining bonuses for cutting claimants off, the backlash hurts the public perception of that service. What are the long-term ramifications of changing public services to these types of models?
Well, it's a really good point.
Do you lose faith with the public?
I think so, but I think one of the important point you make there is that for our members who have to deliver government policies, being a public servant means you have to do what the government of the day says.
Implement
government policy, and very often places like ACC Work and Income, we have members who feel very sick about what they're doing, but they
Sure.
have to do it.
Sure.
And they are the ones who face really tough opposition from the public. And in fact, there's been some tragic consequences. ACC, there was a woman in Henderson stabbed to death, you
Terrible.
might remember a few years back,
Yeah.
shooting the messenger. And very often public servants, they're very professional.
Yep.
They know they've got a job to do. They do it, sure, through their union and through they're allowed to
Yep.
participate in democracy. They have their
Yep.
opposition to policies, but on the job, they implement them, and that's a hellish thing to do.
Yeah.
When the public, the only face they see is the messenger,
Sure.
and they have to, really take on the chin the reaction to a policy they themselves may not like, but they cannot obviously speak against.
And that's the professionalism of the service, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what we expect from them.
Of course,
Yeah.
and as it should be.
Yeah.
But it is tough. It's certainly tough, and very often for a lot of government policies, there's those kinds of policies, but a lot of these cuts that are happening.
Yeah.
The government just says, we'll take the money out, we'll leave it to the departments to figure out how to implement it.
Yeah.
And so you've got services being reduced, no government accountability, but people at the coalface interacting with the public, really taking the flak for not having enough resources, for not being able to do what people want them to do. And I think we've seen with ACC, that was revealed today, wasn't it? I saw it in the paper about the agreement that the minister had with the chair about trying to cut things back. It's no surprise they needed Ross Wilson to go to get a deal like that. Obviously, Ross would never be part of something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's highly dubious to impose those kinds of changes on an unwilling public and an unwilling service.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Final question to both of you. Who benefits from these asset sales? Who loses out? Who benefits? Who loses out?
Well, who benefits are those private international companies probably who have got the money to invest in things that we've built and we own, and then that they can take away and will be monopolies and will be able to ratchet up the prices and hold New Zealanders ransom. And who loses is everybody, the whole society, and actually including those people that think it's a good idea to buy them, because in the end they're part of this community, and the community, if it gets poorer and doesn't have access to decent services, well, it'll reflect on all of us in the future.
Winners and losers?
International finance capital is a winner, and long-term interests of all New Zealanders is a loser.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. After the larger classroom fiasco, one would have thought the government would want to calm the war with education unions, not provoke it further, which lo and behold, they've managed to do with the announcement of league tables. Helen, the moment national standards were announced in 2008, the immediate criticism was that they were a Trojan horse to inject a false competition model using league tables into education. Fast forward to 2012, the government now admit they want to use national standards to create league tables. How can unions work with a government so disingenuous about their long-term goals?
Well, I think the unions are actually working with the stakeholders in education, the parents, the families, that really do understand that their local school is a good school and don't want to see it undermined. But today we saw a story in the paper which said that I think it was 36 of 45 or something Auckland secondary schools appear to be setting their zoning to only attract certain sorts of kids, or to include certain sorts of kids, and cut out kids from poorer backgrounds. Now, why are they doing that? Because they are in competition with each other. And what will they do under league tables? Well, under league tables, when they'll want to attract kids that have got a lot of home support, got a lot of money, got a lot of extra educational opportunities, then schools will be even worse in trying and get their position up on the league table. So it's a very negative thing. I think it was a very interesting comment I read today that while the economy is really faltering and there's no plan and everything, education's going along quite well.
Yes.
But the government is trying to turn that into the sort of scapegoat for what they're not achieving in the economic recovery. It's a real shame. I love our education system, honestly. 95% of our kids go to state schools together. And they're fantastic. And you go overseas, you say that to people, just about every kid in this country goes to a state-funded school. The poorest schools get more money than the richest schools. Every school can employ the best teacher they can get, and they're paid centrally on the same collective employment agreement. It's a miraculous system, and this government is just attacking it.
So why are they attacking it? What's the rationale?
Well, firstly, I think most of their kids go to private schools. In fact, I don't know yet any minister in that cabinet whose kids go to state schools.
So you think it's a bubble world they live in?
I think they live in a bubble.
Yep.
I think secondly, this has always been the right wing's tactic to attack state education and to try and skim off some of that money. It's one of the last big bits of the state, that and health, where they can try and privatise and skim off some of the money.
Yep.
And thirdly, I don't think they believe in equality. and equal opportunity.
Right.
And the state system genuinely provides equality and equal opportunity for every kid. It's one of the miracles of our system, for example, in a hospital, that every kid will be born in the same maternity ward, rich or poor, in this country. Very unusual internationally, and it's the same with a school. There'll be a school down the road that is well funded with good teachers, and you can send your kid there.
Richard, how do we make the public service better? Should all public servants be ranked like this on league tables, or are they a solution looking for a problem?
I think they're a political solution that has got a problem. They're trying to, get cheap support really from the electorate by beating up on the education system or on the public service. The league tables in education are a particular problem, although they do tend to publish tables about health and other things, and it's a short step from that to things like performance pay, where they're trying to sort of beat up on people working in them. And the issues are the same in all of those, and they don't work, is that you can't compare apples with oranges. You can't even the notion of performance pay, I see they're trying to bring down on teachers now.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of that in these public service, and it's a terrible approach. The notion of paying somebody for what they do might sound good, but actually the first thing is you can't actually compare what people do, because it reflects the support they get from their managers, it supports the conditions they're operating in, it supports the things they're dealing with, and it's very often subjective. And most of all, if you tell people you'll pay them more, then you'd better damn well do it. And what normally happens in the public service is people are promised that they'll get paid more if they work extra hard. Then they do, then they say, actually, there's no money. We can't pay you more. And people think, well, that was great. And so it actually undermines performance. And it's crude. It's what we actually need to do to improve the performance of organisations is talk to the staff, work with their unions. Management should get out of the way and let people get on with it, and they should provide people with the support, the training, the skills to problem solve and be innovative at the coalface of public services. Instead, we've gone to a command control, micromanaged system of trying to manage people, and that doesn't work in any society, and it certainly won't work in New Zealand. There needs to be a lot more trust given to the people doing the job and supporting them to do a better job. Instead of assuming that people don't want to work, they should assume that teachers, public servants, nurses, everyone else are actually there because they want to do a damn good job and make a difference. They seem to assume that they have to follow people around and mark them because they want to undermine the system. That's a completely wrong assumption, and it needs to change.
Helen, the majority of the academic research on league tables and using national standards to decide those league tables suggests the idea is deeply flawed. Why isn't the government listening to empirical research over rhetoric?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that the ultimate of league tables, firstly, is that they can privatise the lowest performing, what they consider the lowest performing schools through the charter school model. So they have to have a target, they have to have justification, they can go in and take over, and that's what's happened around the world. Secondly, they can differentiate the funding, and they know that the wealthier schools will perform better because they have an easier ride in terms of the children come in with more background and all that sort of thing, so that they'll be able to target funding to those schools. The second thing, I think, as Richard says, it's this lack of trust in teachers. Teachers are predominantly liberal and challenge authority and probably don't queue up and do exactly what the government wants. But so I think there's an ideological thing there. But just getting back to the basic principle, it's if you think about a teacher may be performing brilliantly by keeping a kid at school in a certain circumstances and difficult circumstances, simply by retaining contact with them and making sure they turn up every day and staying socialised and being in the system. Another teacher may be doing well by getting a kid through NCEA level 3. It just actually there's so many different things that make a good teacher. And to say, we're only going to measure you on this, we're going to pay you on this, we're going to rank your school on this, will mean all of those other things that might be really worth doing will not count, and teachers will be pressured not to do them.
Richard, in the case of league tables, the incentives will lead teachers to just teach to the test regardless of the wider quality of education. Even if you adopt these reward systems into public service, doesn't that lead to public servants simply focusing on those incentives rather than the service?
Of course it does, and that's the problem with targeting non-stop. You get an obsession with meeting the target to hell with everything else, and it really, ironically, is like centralised planning in the worst form. That doesn't work. You can't make predictions. I mean, what are you meant to do? Conditions change, but you go, no, I just continue to meet my targets because that's all I'm asked to do. It's micromanagement to the extreme, and you've got to give people a lot more trust and you give them a lot more support to work out for themselves what are the priorities within particular situations, and actually there's talk about innovation, there's talk about actually problem solving. Well, how do you do that when you've got sort of stakes in the ground? Meet those targets or be damned. It's really a poor approach to management. It won't lead to desired outcomes. And as soon as something's not a target, you think, is that not a priority? So, for example, recently the government announced some health targets. This time they didn't mention mental health. So is mental health not a priority? Of course it is.
Right,
And there's
right.
thousands of people engaged in the mental health business,
Yeah.
in mental health service. Should they be thinking that suddenly we're no longer a priority? Of course not. And that's the distortion effect you get
Right.
when you set targets and you tell people meet those targets, or you'll lose pay, or you'll lose this, or you'll lose that. It's a really poor management approach, and it's actually very outmoded. I don't
I
know
see
why we
they're
pick up
talking
these
about
ideas.
bringing in performance pay for the police force. Can you imagine it? What are the performance targets going to be for the police force? You know,
That would
how
just-
is that going to affect
Yeah.
their reputation,
Yeah.
their ability to work
Yeah,
within a
yeah,
community?
yeah.
I mean, that is scary. And
Yeah.
let's just, when they start bringing it in for the military, then we're going to have to really worry.
Yeah.
One question to both of you. Who wins, who loses from league tables?
Oh, the kids definitely lose because actually, and in the end, our school system will suffer. And we've got, as I say, this beautiful, beautiful school system, which I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of our teachers. I think they work really hard.
I think the government's hoping they'll win because
Yep.
they'll convince people that this is better for kids, but
Yep.
I think definitely the losers will be the education system and will be teachers who at the moment have a career where they can do their very best. Soon they'll be feeling like they're being manipulated by a command and control
Sure,
approach, and
sure.
that will lead to a deterioration of people who want to teach. And that's in the long term.
It seems
detriment
bizarre
to all
that
of
for
us.
an education system that is ranked 6th in the OECD and is held up and seen as the envy overseas, that we have a government just so hell-bent on dismantling and not trusting the people who have led it to being that successful.
And
Absolutely.
outperforming
Isn't-
countries with league tables.
Yes,
I mean, you know,
yes,
because
yeah.
we just stifle the innovation. We've got really innovative teachers
Yes.
who work out what the kids need to learn and do it, you know.
It just seems so
using their own strengths.
counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It certainly does, but you know.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. After bending over backwards for Warners in the manufacturing crisis at the Hobbit, it now turns out that Warners has closed their distribution office in Auckland. When should we rewrite labour and immigration laws for corporations? Helen, you were personally vilified and threatened over this manufacturing crisis, and you were a loud critic against changing our laws. How do you feel now watching Warner's shutter office after they've gotten what they wanted?
Well, you know, I never give Warners a second thought, actually. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me that a corporate that behaved the way that they did
Yeah.
would continue to behave that way. And there's nothing in the way the government responded to make them reform
Yeah.
or to consider that they had New Zealand's interest at heart. But I think actually, you know, that law change, that making all of those, that industry casualised and contracted is really an issue that we still haven't resolved. And we know from people who are working in the industry that are still contacting us that conditions are deteriorating in the industry, and you know it's the international competition hasn't meant that New Zealand's won that race.
Yeah.
You know, despite the government could pour any sort of amount of money in there. So I think, you know, it's just a lesson that actually you should change your laws on principle. There's all
Yep.
sorts of laws being changed on a whim. Without any respect for workers' rights. This was one of them, and in the end, there's no reward for that.
Richard, when should we change our laws for corporations, and how do we measure the changes?
Well, I just don't think we should change things like employment law, environmental law.
Yeah.
You know, there are certain standards that we shouldn't go underneath just to make a deal. And really, that's the kind of thing that very poor countries do when they set up new economic zones.
Sure.
They're desperate to get corporations in, and you know, it's a way of ensuring a lot of poverty and a lot of misery that becomes the lowest common denominator. And I think we'd all thought New Zealand wasn't one of those places.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we did a deal to make us look like one of those countries. I mean, there's certainly ways that government can support business.
Yep.
It's with a trained, skilled workforce. It's with a high-skill economy. It's with decent infrastructure. It's actually with good public services and no corruption in your public service and so on. It's not about doing cheap backdoor deals to say, oh, we'll give you our people really cheap and we won't expect them to stand up. We won't expect any standards for them.
Sure.
That's the wrong way of going about it. That's saying our people are cheap, come and do business here. We'd rather government said come and do business here because we have a highly skilled, highly trained, highly functional economy and society. That's the best place to do business, not the cheap way.
Yeah. Helen, opposition parties all claimed Warner's leaving for Australia after gaining what they wanted is a slap into in the face for the government. Was this about keeping a movie here, or was it about discrediting the union movement in the wake of large-scale protests against the 90-day right to sack powers?
Well, I think it was both, actually.
Yeah.
I think two things. One is it wasn't about keeping the movie here, but it was about, you know, having a go at the union movement. It was about getting the law changed as a precedent for many reductions in work rights that they've subsequently done and intend to do into the future. And they actually have a real disregard for what it's like to be a working person in this country. And it's getting harder and harder and harder. And this year they intend to change the law again and bring through another whole wave of work right changes, which will reduce collective bargaining even further. So I think there was a range of motives, and I've really given up guessing what on earth would make them do the thing that they did in terms of that film, Sky City, the pokey deal. You know, what are their first principles, and what do they stand for in terms of a fair society?
They don't seem to have any value beyond a fixed dollar amount of what they're going to gain, do they?
Yeah, they just seem to have a lack of understanding about the general population and what's important and what we might value. You know, I mean, in terms of first principles, there's no real explanation for what.
Richard, was this corporate welfare or prudent deal making by the government?
Well, I think it was deal making. I don't know about prudent. In terms of corporate welfare, it certainly was welfare for a large corporate. I understand that a lot of businesses actually thought it wasn't at all fair.
Right.
If they're going to cut deals with Warner's, why don't they cut deals with us?
Sure.
So, you know, it was really a political stunt that at the time seemed to pay off, I think, for the Prime Minister. He emerged a hero, was sort of saving the country from some kind of problem.
That didn't exist in the first place.
No, and I think, you know, history will judge really whether that was a wise move or not, and certainly we're not convinced, in fact, we thought it was irresponsible. But, you know, we expect more. We expect the government to act like a government, not like a corporate itself, or not like a corporate deal breaker, but actually to uphold the standards of a decent society for everybody, not just a few multinationals who come in here.
Yeah. Final question on this. Do you think Warner's holds New Zealand up as an example of how to bully a small country into getting what they want in their overseas meetings?
I'm not sure, but they may as well, because that's exactly what they can do.
It was a perfect example,
It was a
wasn't
master manipulation, and you know, I think, as Richard said, more and more OIA, you know, information is coming out about what really went on and what the real deal was, and I think people are waking up to it. And obviously, at the time, you know, their voice was being heard very strongly over the voice of people who knew what was going on, and a lot of people got vilified, as you say. But in the end, I'm sure they do say you go to New Zealand, and if you're going there, this is the way to sort of crack a deal.
Did the executives on their corporate flight back to America refer to us as shire folk? Did they?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'm sure they're dining out on it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, panel. Let's wrap the show with a final word. Helen, your final word this week is?
Yeah, well, I spent this morning meeting the mother of Sharon Preet Dhaliwal, who was a young security guard murdered on his first night at work at a Henderson Fulton Hogan building site. She's here in New Zealand finding out what happened to her son, absolutely appalled by the circumstances surrounding his death. The CTU is representing her. We're trying to get some accountability from Fulton Hogan, who benefited from his work that night, who was responsible for contracting that contractor who was clearly inadequate for the job being done. And they're avoiding us at the moment. We're continuing. The Department of Labour has determined not to prosecute Fulton Hogan. Instead, are prosecuting his direct employer, CNE Security. They're the low-hanging fruit, but actually, who benefited? How can companies contract out of their health and safety responsibilities in such a way? So actually, we're continuing to try and pursue that. It's tricky, it's difficult, but really to meet a mother of a kid, 21 years old, as she said, if she'd been in the country, she wouldn't have let him on that building site that night. And huge loss there just in that room, feeling it was, pretty emotional. And I'm really hopeful that Fulton Hogan can reconsider their position and understand that actually they can come out of this, they can step up, not do it again, set some standards for future contracting, and compensate this woman for what is a terrible, terrible circumstance. Terrible story.
Richard, your final word this week?
Well, today's the first day in over 100 years that the public service doesn't have a Department of Labour.
Yes.
The Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment comes into effect, which is another change for 3,500 people who have undergone constant restructuring, not continuous improvement, but continuous restructuring again. And for the first time in 100 years, the government's decided that the Department of Labour wasn't business friendly enough, and they've needed to put it into a business-facing organisation. And I think that
whatever that means.
Well, it means that their businesses would seem to be more important than the interests of Labour, and so we don't need a Department of Labour anymore. So I think it's quite an auspicious day, and for the wrong reasons, and we'll see how that develops. But 3,500 people, lives turned upside down again. It seems to be the life of a public servant while we have this government in place making the cuts that they're making.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Richard. That's it for the show. Check out our Facebook site for ongoing union campaigns and actions, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter account for for all the latest show updates. Thank you for watching Aotearoa. Join us again 8 p.m. next Monday for the Union Report here on Triangle TV, the home of original public broadcasting. Good night, New Zealand.